Hey everyone!
Hola a todos!
This is Jahaira.
And this is Stephanie, and welcome to Cuento Crimen podcast.
Y aquí on the Cuento Crimen podcast, we are a true crime podcast and we bring a new case every Wednesday.
Cada miércoles.
And these are cases that don't get much media attention, so chances are you haven't heard of some of these cases.
And we cover these cases in Spanglish.
Así que agarra a tu abuelita, tu abuelito, tu mamá, tu papá, a quien tú gustes, and come join us every Wednesday for a new true crime case. Hoy vamos a hablar sobre el caso de Elizabeth Garcia y ella era una mamá joven, ella tenía 26 años y era mamá a 3 hijos. Her children were Xavier Mendoza of 13, Jerome Mendoza de 11, and Sene Mendoza of 10.
And here's a little bit more background on who she was. I believe at some point ella trabajaba en la tienda AutoZone. She was there for about 2 years and a half. And she was also at some point attending New Mexico Junior College. Y en unos artículos leímos que she was described as someone who was so motivated to get ahead in life for herself and for her children.
And honestly, not to be cliche, pero cuando uno tiene hijos, your whole reality changes. As cliche as it sounds, you think of the little ones and you're like, yeah, I want to get better for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely relate to her on that. Y entonces el 16 de enero del 2002, Elizabeth estaba trabajando at New Mexico's largest chain of convenience store, which is called Allsup's Enterprises of Clovis, New Mexico. Y este día en particular, she was working the graveyard shift and she was working it all alone. And after her shift, she just disappeared.
It was investigated that around 2:30 a.m., she mysteriously disappeared from her job. And this was noticed because a customer came in and the store estaba sola. No había empleados. It was just a store that was just open, but no one was there to help out. And so they were able to narrow it down to the exact time that Elizabeth disappeared.
A resident in the area later found her body that day in a Hobbs field and called it in. So the investigators headed to the field and they were able to identify this body as Elizabeth Garcia's. And they were able to document some of the things they found. Por ejemplo, ellos encontraron a shoe print, tire marks, y hasta encontraron un poco de ADN.
They also wrote down everything that they found, right? Elizabeth was fully clothed when she was stabbed. And later in the autopsy, they also discovered that she was stabbed with so much force that she had broken bones. And they also found semen on her body.
And I think, right off the bat, the fact that she had 50 stab wounds, that means this person clearly wanted to kill her. They clearly wanted her dead.
Yeah, I think they say if it's that, intense, it's kind of like a crime of passion, right?
Yeah.
Or could it be a crime of opportunity and just someone going on a raged type of thing?
And so right away they looked into some suspects, pero they didn't really lead to anything because parecía que todas las personas de interés were cleared out.
16 meses después, on May 14th, 2003, authorities recovered a body who was later identified as Patty Simon. And some workers had to call it in because they came across it, right? And so authorities discovered that she suffered from blunt force trauma, a broken nose, and skull fractures. And to be specific, she was found in a caliche pit right outside Hobbs, New Mexico.
And all over this case, there was so much DNA that was found that later was connected to their prime suspect.
And a little bit more on Patty. There is some similarities between Elizabeth Garcia's case and Patty Simon's case. So Patty disappeared. También ella estaba trabajando at a department store. And right away, this case wasn't automatically connected to Elizabeth Garcia. No one really kind of saw the connection or there wasn't evidence to connect them. And we'll go into that later, but we're just stating how there's those similarities between the cases.
So Patty was discovered el mismo día que desapareció. Y entonces a delivery man and a coworker se encontraron con un hombre que estaba acostado y no traía camisa. And he was just laying down on the road. And so the coworker stopped a ver si necesitaba ayuda or if like he was okay, you know? And he ended up actually giving the shirtless man a ride back to his apartment, but offered if he wanted a ride to the hospital porque el hombre tenía rasguños por donde quiera. And like it just seemed like he had just gone through something. Like he did not look okay.
Yeah, it's like a good Samaritan asking, like, do you need some like medical attention? Because you don't look too well. But este señor les dijo que no, que he was all scratched up porque la noche anterior he was at a bowling alley talking to this girl que se llamaba Patty. And then Patty was, you know, being attacked by some guys. And so he kind of had to jump in, but doesn't really remember everything, like all the details. He just remembers waking up at the side of the road where this person found him.
So después de escuchar esto, you know, he just drops him off and just lets it be. But as he drives away, he just, I don't know, I guess, you know, as a person, you reflect on the situation. Y a él se le hizo muy raro and he just could not process it. So then they decided to report it to the police. And at this point, the police were already investigating Patty's case because it had been discovered earlier that day, right? And so they went over to this man's apartment to talk to him because they might have thought that there could be a connection. You know, I mean, like the signs are obvious, right? Like el hombre dijo que él estaba platicando con una mujer que se llama Patty y ahora una mujer que se llama Patty is missing and he was just, you know, found laying on the road y no se miraba bien. He had scratches. And all they know is Patty's dead. And here's this man talking about that the night before he was with a woman named Patty.
Mm-hmm. So like some similarities or like overlaps, like, like they need to see if these two incidents are related. Entonces, the authorities arrived to his apartment and this person was in the same conditions as when he was dropped off. So he was still shirtless and all scratched up. He, you know, was in no rush to clean up or anything like that. Like same situation, same appearance.
Yeah, which is kind of strange because after a tough night out or a rough night, like that's what you want to do. Like, shower, relax.
Yeah, clean up, you know.
Sleep, yeah.
Yeah. So at this point, they were able to identify this person as Paul Levette. And he does agree to interview. And authorities obtained a search warrant to get his blood and hair samples.
And when authorities interview him, él les da una historia muy diferente a la historia que le dio a las personas que lo recogieron. So now he was saying that he had met Patty at work and that they were inside a car when a man approached them and began to threaten him with a knife and was demanding drugs. Y entonces dice que después de eso, they all got into a physical altercation.
Y luego también dice que Patty conocía a esta persona that caused this whole fight. And so his story goes on and él está hablando how this man made him and Patty drive to somewhere remotely. Y ahí fue cuando esta persona le pegó a Patty and then made him drive with Patty as a passenger. And then this person killed Patty and made him, Paul, take her off the car and place her later where she was found. And at some point, Paul is in the trunk and then he wakes up at the side of the road.
And I know it seems like a lot, right?
Yeah.
But at this point, las autoridades no creen que estos dos casos estén conectados. And so we're going to take it back because, you know, we're talking about Patty, but now how is it connected to Elizabeth's case? Entonces, a este punto, las autoridades no creían o no habían conectado el caso de Elizabeth al caso de Patty. Y no fue hasta una segunda entrevista que tuvieron con Paul que el nombre de Elizabeth vino... it came up. And I think the investigators asked to start from the beginning. And then he started talking about January 2002. But he's taken it all a year before. As soon as he said that date, investigators knew that there was more to just Patty.
Yeah. Paul had a lot to say in these interviews and he definitely changed his story. So investigators did want to keep interviewing him, figuring out what his real role in this situation is, right? And in one of his interviews, Paul mentioned his brother-in-law, Stephen DeMoss, maybe being involved with Elizabeth's case because at least Stephen's dad was interested in Elizabeth. And I guess Stephen had a grudge because Elizabeth maybe rejected his dad. And by the way, Stephen DeMoss is the brother-in-law de Paul at the time of Elizabeth's disappearance.
So Paul claimed that he gave Stephen his DNA and that it could potentially be on this crime scene. And he was talking about Elizabeth's crime scene. His DNA was there because of a condom that was found along with some pubic hair.
Saying, oh, if you find my DNA, it's because I gave it. I didn't do anything, but I gave it to Stephen. And then en otra entrevista, él está hablando de otro hombre, not Stephen, just a different man, que atacó a Patty. Now this is Patty's case. And then he's changed his story that it, in fact, was his brother-in-law, Stephen DeMoss. And some other details change in the story as well. For example, in this story, he is not in the trunk at all.
And he also said that Stephen le preguntó por su ADN, and so he spit into a cup, and that's why they might be able to find his DNA on the scene. I think it's great. I don't know. As soon as you start changing your story, just something is not right. There's just... And say if this was the truth, que él escupió en un vaso, so why wouldn't you say that the first time? ¿Por qué lo estás diciendo hasta ahorita? For little details like this, it's just so insignificant. So why not just say the truth?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then, en otra entrevista, él también está cambiando más detalles, diciendo que él no tiene nada que ver con lo que pasó, and then just changing overall, some details. But the one thing that is staying the same, él dice que Stephen DeMoss was involved.
There were so many similarities between the two cases, Patty's and Elizabeth's. Both women disappeared in similar circumstances. They were both found with their throats slit and were found in remote areas. Y también en las dos escenas, los investigadores were able to find other similarities. Por ejemplo, ellos encontraron a shoe print, que por cierto, later on, they were able to confirm it matched Paul's shoes. So that's also a big red flag. And in addition, the tire marks at both scenes también were a match to Paul's car.
Investigadores pudieron colectar ADN from both crime scenes and later was linked to Paul Levette.
They had so much evidence piled up against Paul, but when it came to the trial, there was a very interesting turn. The defense attorney, Mark Horton, and Rebecca Reese called for witnesses, and they were trying to argue that Paul followed Stephen DeMoss and that, Stephen was the one that was involved with the murders y que Paul nomás estaba allí because he was following him. And that the reason why Paul followed him was because he was scared of him. So their goal was kind of to paint a certain picture of Stephen, the brother-in-law, and kind of start pointing everything towards him. And the goal was kind of to point fingers at Stephen and kind of just turn it all on him.
In this trial, Paul Levette was facing 2 charges of first-degree murder and 1 charge of sexual abuse and 1 count of kidnapping.
Jurors took 4 hours to deliberate. Y al final, Paul Levette was charged with the death of 26-year-old Elizabeth Garcia and 35-year-old Patty Simon. And he was sentenced to life.
In the case of Elizabeth Garcia, también leímos que there was a lawsuit over her kidnapping and murder against New Mexico's largest chain of convenience stores, Allsup's Enterprises of Clovis. And this lawsuit was settled in a matter of minutes, and her children were given $51 million in damages.
And that sounds like a lot of money, right? $51 million is a lot of money, but it just sucks because...
At the cost of what?
At the cost of what? Perdieron a su madre. It could
the
never...
The most important person,
yeah.
The mother.
Mm-hmm. But, going back to the lawsuit, when we were researching, we found that there was no security cameras and she was the only one working there. So that is why they settled on that.
Yeah, I think this is really important to say because she was working alone and that, it's kind of scary, especially if people know that you're working alone, people learn your work schedules, that could be very dangerous. So after this, the State Environmental Health Board is requiring convenience stores that are open from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. to have 2 people working or put bulletproof glasses.
Honestly, kind of irrelevant, but kind of not. But I remember my first job, I was going to be alone closing like a bakery shop. And I was terrified. I mean, when it was my first job, but like it being alone in such a like open space, and like you have the cashier, you have the responsibility of like el dinero, it's scary. So I'm kind of glad that this was like a change and like a requirement.
Another thing that we read towards the end of our research, we found that New York Supreme Court ordered a new trial because the first one combined both cases into a single trial. So the case of Elizabeth Garcia and Patty Simon into one trial.
So they overturned the conviction in Elizabeth Garcia's death, but upheld his conviction for raping and murdering Patty Simon. Y la razón because it was overturned for Elizabeth's case was, and we quote, the justices ruled that a district court judge error in holding one trial for both murders, and it was prejudicial to Paul Levette in the Elizabeth Garcia case.
So that's all that we have for this week's case. I just want to comment on like the fact that, you know, someone came across someone laying down on the floor and they tried to help him out. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they were able to connect, you know, this person to a crime that was just made, right? You know, someone who just murdered Patty Simon. And then later this was connected to Elizabeth Garcia.
And that's why we always say that any little thing que no se sienta bien en tu corazón, en tu gut, call it in, because it could be a lead.
It could be a lead to something, yeah.
Because like that mailman could have literally just given him a ride, y así cada quien se va con su día, pero no, he was like, this is a bit strange. Let me call it in. And now we're here.
But yeah, that is all that we have for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in every week. We appreciate you all, and we'll see you all next week.